money it's a means of slavery, no different than slavery of old. But what's awesome about this slavery is people buy it as a self-imposed form of slavery. It was almost exactly a year ago. My youngest daughter turns 18, and the one place she wanted to go was the British Museum, because that's where the Rosetta Stone is. And for whatever reason, she's been endlessly fascinated with mythology her whole life. So off we go. And the one thing about the British Museum that's amazing is the British were around at the right era to go plundering, and they took all this awesome stuff back from other cultures, you know? Yeah. And so you can see the tale of hundreds of different empires in there. And each of them had their own organizing story about why this pyramid made sense. Now, sometimes you were on top because you were a descendant of God. Sometimes it's because you had the right bloodline. And other times it was because, who knows? But there was always
a sword.
There's always a reason for why you fit here, you were on the bottom, and it was always different, right?
Yeah.
Now, money that's our organizing principle. It tells you where you are in the hierarchy. Right. And what's fun about our money system is we can all pretend that if I just had enough of it, I too could be right at the top of this, right? Whereas before I was either royal bloodline or not. I was either a direct descendant of Ra or I wasn't, Yeah. So all cultures have an excuse for why this makes sense, right? You were either part of the priestly caste that was sacrificing people and rolling heads down the temple, or you weren't. And so money is just our way of making sense out of this, right? And money it's a means of slavery, no different than slavery of old. But what's awesome about this slavery is people buy it as a self-imposed form of slavery.
People
fully
buy
accept that story. We totally accept it. Yeah. I'm out of money. I'm going to go live under a bridge. I suck, right? A lot of people hold that narrative.
Yeah,
it's just how we do it.
We drive around in the streets where I live in Honolulu, and we look at all the homeless, because it's a place you can live in the winter if you're homeless. And we realize that these people are probably very worthwhile people before they lost it, but they couldn't maintain $1,000 a month rent plus bills, plus the job that so they fell off the edge. But the system we've got just kind of reduces them to rubble and builds the next layer on top of them.
Absolutely. So money gives us a lot of things, but one thing it does is it allows us to insulate ourselves from each other. That's an important feature of money, right? Mm-hmm. And it allows us to insulate ourselves from the consequences of our decisions. So, this really snapped into focus for me. A long time ago, I was watching this movie about Erin Brockovich, and she was the whistleblower who managed to expose the fact that PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric, was busy dumping hexavalent chromium into wells that was then poisoning and killing people, right? Yeah. And I realized at that time that, I bet you not one of those engineers working for PG&E would have taken a vial of hexavalent chromium and dumped it straight into a child's cereal bowl. None of them would have done that. That would have been monstrous. But because they could put it down an injection well, that was one step removed, and that's all it takes for humans. Just give me that one step of degree of separation from the consequence and the action.
And those engineers were educated with a fatally flawed axiom, which is called in the industry, the solution to pollution is dilution. But in a closed system, it doesn't go away. And guess what? Life has the tendency of reaccumulating and reconcentrating those rare things that you've dispersed into the environment.
Well, absolutely true. So, of my more recent pieces, something I've been talking about for close to 4 years now, because I noticed it 5 years ago, was that when we would drive, we do a very traditional drive from where I live in Massachusetts to upstate New York. Again, my family's up there, so there's a summer place. About 6 hours of travel through just upstate New York. This is all cornfields and woods, and there's just nothing there, but very rural. Not a lot of industry.
Your phrase, there's nothing there, that's from the perspective you were taught, which is if you don't see buildings, there's nothing there.
Not a lot of human stuff there.
Except, by the way, I'm not pointing a finger at you. I'm just showing how even those of us who know the problem are still using the terminology of the old system, which is the only thing that counts is money and the things that money can buy and build.
Anyway, I started noticing there were no insects on the windshield because I remembered as a kid, I'm 56. So when I was a boy, when I was 6, 7, 8, 9, every time we stopped for gas in the old paneled station wagon, somebody had to get out and scrape the windshield off.
Yeah.
And now I realized, but it just dawned on me one day, I was like, I made the whole drive there and back 12 total hours in July and not one bug on the windshield.
That was 5 years ago. And now we know that 75% of the bugs on Earth have disappeared in that time.
We've put something into the larger atmosphere or into the world. We don't know what yet, but we've put something in that has destroyed the bottom of the terrestrial insect food pyramid all across the northern hemisphere for sure. And it looks like increasingly the southern hemisphere as well. That's beyond, like, that one piece of data alone. An intact culture would say, whatever we've done that's new in the last 20 years, pull it.
Yes, the first rule of holes is when you're in one, stop digging.
Yep.
But we continue to dig because it makes money for Bayer, Monsanto, Union Carbide.
Yeah, just for a few bucks, like the whole thing, like, oh, we don't know how we could possibly do away with the neonicotinoid class of pesticides. Oh my God, it would just be such this huge economic thing. We'll have to study it. Like, I think they made $800 million on it last year in profits in the United States. Like, really, for less than $1 billion, we're willing to run an experiment where we might sacrifice an entire layer of the insect food pyramid. I have this almost fatalistic view that at some point we're going to wake up one day and we're going to discover there's this mysterious mold across all of our crops. And we're going to say, what was that? And if we study it hard enough, we're going to say, oh, the mold is there because the nematodes went away. And the nematodes went away because they were relied on a certain midge for a certain part of their life cycle, which needed a snail, which needed a bird or something, right? There's some big crazy connection. Yep. And when one of those chains gets yanked out, it can't be put back in again. It's like a done deal. You have a new ecosystem. It's not the old one, but then it's too late. Then you just go, what's the new ecosystem? And like in the oceans, we're like, well, apparently the new ecosystem in the oceans is jellyfish,
A couple of times in this conversation when you were speaking, it occurred to me the irony, I should say, that you were trained in one field, but you ended up backing into a career as an ecologist, sort of. I mean, you're noticing the impact of the financial markets and money and, 98% loss of the ground, and you've related the two. And so the intimate adverse relationship between the current economic system and the ecology of Earth is like the result of your own particular evolution, might I say.
I had to learn many more things than I thought. So my PhD was one thing, and I'm glad I did it. But I've honestly done more studying about more topics since then. So I'm going to self-grant myself like 3 more because I had to learn about human behavior. I thought I was in the business of sharing data for a long time. Yeah. Turned out, whoops, information alone doesn't change behaviors. Behaviors are rooted in a belief system. So now you have to understand belief systems, which means you have to understand the amygdala as much as the cortex. You have to understand how we're wired. You have to understand why the backfire effect actually is a very real thing. You have to understand how to dismantle belief systems if you want to effectively communicate new information to people in a way where they can receive it enough to actually act on it. So that was a whole branch of study. As well, I had to become something of an energy expert because stop me if you've heard this story before. Organism discovers new source of food, lives into and beyond that source of food, and then the population crashes.
It sounds like Easter Island, sounds like a bunch of things.
Yeah, it's the oldest story in the evolutionary book, which is you grow into your available food supply, and when your food supply crashes, you crash, right? So one of the things I care most deeply about is that up until about 1920 or so, farming was a net energy productive activity for humans. The sun rains energy down. We would collect it in plants, harvest that, store it, and for every 1 calorie a farmer expended, about 10 were returned. That was a positive, productive enterprise. Since then, we've gotten to the point now where there's about, upside down, 10 calories of fossil fuels embedded in each calorie that you or I or anybody listening to this eats, right? Yep. Okay, what's that all about? Well, there's fertilizers involved and diesel in the manufacturing and also the transport and the storing. So we are now literally eating fossil fuels. That's plan A. And a reasonable person would say, well, they seem to be finite. What's plan B? We don't have a plan B. Here's what fossil fuels are going to do for us. We're going to grow our economy exponentially forever. Hey, Hosanna, amen. We're going to always have access to food, even though in the use of these fossil fuels, we've taken productive soil and turned it into dirt. We've mined the organic content, the macro and micronutrients, all of those are like gone. That's okay. We use fossil fuels to keep shoving those things back in because you can grow things hydroponically if you have to. As well, we're always going to have access to more energy, and that's that. So that's the entire plan of my country, the United States right now, is cheap energy. That's it. That's the whole plan. And an ordinary prudent adult can look at the data and go, this doesn't last forever. We already see that if we've lost 98% of the insects in Puerto Rico at the current level of the economy, and every plan is to double the impact, double the extraction rate from here. We've already strip mined all of the top pelagic fish. Ocean birds are down 70% right now. For some reason, ancient trees are dying all over the globe, from the baobab trees in Africa, the kauri trees in New Zealand. So there's a variety of things going on. And so, again, a prudent response to that, if I was, on the family farm and it was really suddenly collapsing, I'd get the family together and I would say, what are we doing? Let's
go to the bomb shelter, but there ain't no bomb shelter in this case.
Right. Maybe we should let this field lie fallow for 3 years. I don't know what, right? But we're not even having that conversation, which is why you and I are having it now.
Can I, for just a moment, you can pause and kind of breathe. I want to do a screen share. This is my daily weather report, shall we say. This is available to anyone on the internet at something called Null School, Earth Null School. Okay, and I'm just zooming out here. And what you're looking at, because I tuned it in before we came on, what you're looking at is a polar view from the North Pole. Here, I'll click on it and you'll see there's Greenland. Mm-hmm. I'm on top of, okay, this is for the viewers now. And the pink, what's the pink? That's the Arctic jet stream. Well, let me turn the globe upside down. Let's go look at the Antarctic jet stream. The Antarctic jet stream used to be a little bit tighter than that and more circular, but now it's meandering a little bit. But that used to be a snapshot of the North Polar jet stream. But look at how big that sucker is. I mean, it goes all the way down to the equator almost in areas. It gets, now take a look at the United States again, where you and I both live. Okay, the Arctic, now I live in Hawaii. The Arctic jet stream is overhead right now. We're having the weirdest weather you can imagine. Climate does affect weather, what goes on up there in the sky, and we are changing what goes on there. Look at over the heartland of the United States, big band of Arctic air. Now, I'm going to switch for a moment. Okay, I'll put the United States right in the middle, since most of the damage has been historically done by the US and maybe UK and continues to be done. Let me go to the surface temperature and take a look at something here. Look at how there's blue and purple and light blue. Those are frigid Arctic air extending down. Okay, if you look at the South Pole, remember the map of the South Pole? Well, that blue is, you don't want to be in that water for more than 2 minutes. And the purple is the coldest and it's constrained. But if you go back to the Northern Hemisphere, and that's why we get cold in the wrong places now. And yes, that is global warming.
Well, sure. And the first polar vortex that sort of snapped off and knocked us 4 or 5 years ago down here in New England, it was pretty brutal, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, and some people see, there's no climate change. And of course, the integrity of that polar vortex jet stream, that's what broke down. It got a little loose and wobbly. And so we had that one anomaly, and then we had another. Now we're having more and more of them, and they're just happening now. And one thing I know for sure is heat is, when you have a lot of heat, that's like energy in the bank, but cold is also a form of, it's got its own bank account, right? And when that vortex happened 5 years ago and it left the polar area, I made a prediction. I said, guess what? We're probably going to have more ice melting next year. And we did, because guess what? It lost its cold. Yep. We received it. We warmed that cold up using our latent heat down here.
And it's like your kids go to the refrigerator and freezer and they open both doors to look for a yogurt they put in there 6 months ago. And they leave the doors open and you go yelling at them, don't let all the cold out, which
right.
is incorrect physics.
Exactly.
Don't let in the warm in, but that's what we've done. We let the door open on the Arctic.
Right. And so, again, seeing all of this cold air come down and, Chicago can't start cars and things like that, that's fine. But I guess, my guess would be that, again, we're going to find a bunch of anomalies when it comes to the rate and amount and extent of ice loss again next year. So we're watching this all happening, and the inability to effectively organize a response is because of something that you caught in me talking about it, is that every single piece of programming we're exposed to is all geared around this idea that what we need, want, and deserve is just more economic growth. We need more stuff, more consumption, more. And no other discussion is allowed, right? We have a highly complex economy. It has 300,000 job classifications, 12 billion stock keeping units. There's probably 5 in this pen, right? This is a stock keeping unit. Somebody has to figure out how to make the clip. Somebody has to figure out how to make the ink, right? So we have 12 billion of these things to manage, and it's getting more and more and more complex, and everybody thinks that's just how things are. And they don't understand that that's how things are with energy. But if we took energy out of that equation,
with a lot of cheap energy,
everything gets a lot simpler again, right? So 2008 was the first time in living adult record where we had something that was very, very unusual, not the great financial crisis. It's that credit growth actually went in reverse for about 9 months. It was the first time in our banking system that credit growth was not exponentially growing at about 8.9% a year. It actually wobbled, little tiny wibble. And that's what the Federal Reserve fought. They high-minded stuff. They said, we have to preserve jobs and inflation, blah. They don't care about that. What they care about is that credit growth actually went backwards and the world almost ended, economically speaking. And it did, right? Mervyn King, then the Bank of England governor, and we had Hank Paulson, both wrote memoirs and both said we were within hours of complete systemic failure of the entire global banking system.
I'm sorry, a lot of people would have suffered, but had that happened, because we're either going to back away from this growth thing on our own, or it's going to happen for us.
Listen, that's the nature of humanity, right? You either change by insight or by pain. Mm-hmm. That could have been a painful moment, and I would have accepted that because it looks like we're not going to change by insight. We just went for 10 more years of everything that I thought was bad in 2008 is even worse here 11 years later. We have more debt, more unstable systems. We've got even more concentration of wealth. All these things that are just not there. We had an opportunity in 2008 to actually stare in the face of what we had done and say we need to do things differently. And we just doubled down and said, nah, we'll take more of the same. That's the definition of insanity. Yeah. It really is.
So what do we need to do?
Well, a lot of different answers for that from different people. Mine is simply that each of us has to become the change we wish to see. It's not possible to change things from the outside. I am not a believer that if we elect the right person and they put the right programs and press that from the outside in, that anything will happen. Instead, every single change or challenge to the social dynamic that's existed, every challenge to the status quo has been brought kicking and screaming from the outside back towards Washington, right? So human rights, women's rights, environmental movement, nothing, labor rights, nothing was originated in Washington, D.C. So for anybody who's thinking, if we just had this person instead of that person, it would be better, show me where in the data you can say, and here's when we had that amazing leader who did that kind of stuff for us, because it's not there yet. Maybe it'll happen, but I don't see it. So now we're back down to you and me. And so I think that every person here listening needs to first avail themselves of the information all the way up to the point where they go, I've got it. Don't tell me about the starfish dying off the Pacific. I'm done. I don't need to know about the big trees or the climate.
I got it.
I got
it. Tanking. The ecosystem is tanking. Okay, got it.
Great. So you have that much understanding, and then you have to move to action, right? Yeah. And so the actions are to begin to align your specific things that you do on a daily basis with that larger narrative. These are totally necessary. Don't be fooled by this idea, but totally insufficient, right? Whatever I do is insufficient. You can't operate that way. These are necessary. And even if they prove to be insufficient, they were still necessary. We all have to become the change we wish to see. So, this is part of the narrative is what drives human stories. That's what drives us. So the first thing is to extirpate, root out these bad stories we've got. So here's a story I carried for a long time. When humans show up, they wreck stuff, right? right? If you put,
Tell that to my kid. No.
Right? They'll wreck stuff. You put enough humans in a spot and all the animals will disappear and there's no more fish and it gets ugly, right?
Yeah.
But permaculture teaches us that the opposite of that can be true, that we have been fed a story that we are agents of extraction and degeneration. And we can be the opposite. We can be agents of abundance and regeneration. So if you came to my house, I would show you all the different plantings. It looks beautiful. And you can say, wow, that's a really nice sort of garden you got. But if you went deeper, I'd say, these are for the pollinators. These show up at different times of the year. These do this. I plant some of this for me. The rest is for the animals. I don't know who, but they'll show up. And I can use my intelligence to create topsoil at 100 times faster than nature could alone, right? So humans can interact in an abundance, regenerative way. We know we can do this. So that's first thing we have to get rid of is that story that says, you put enough humans in a spot and we're going to wreck it. That is true if what we're doing is consuming and extracting. But if we're interacting in another way, we can be the exact opposite of that. So we need to have that story in place as well, right?
Yeah. No, you nailed it. Thank you.
It's absolutely true. And here's the relief in this story, such as it is. I don't hold out any particular hope that we're going to be able to double forever. That story is broken and dead. I've already released that story. It's not going to happen. But this is also a moment in time where we can back up and we can look at the macro data and say, wow, suicides, obesity rates, et cetera, all these sort of markers that say we're not happy. And it turns out that being a consumer, which I consider a derogatory term now,
it is, yeah,
is actually not a really fulfilling place to be. In fact, if you look at the jobs we've given ourselves to keep ourselves busy, as David Graeber, the economist, called, he said, those are bullshit jobs, right? They're just keeping you busy. They have no meaning and purpose. You look at the opioid epidemic, and really what is an opioid? It's an anesthetic, meaning without beauty, anesthesia, aesthetic being beauty. There's no beauty in our lives. We don't build for beauty. You go into Grand Central Station in New York, to pick an example, and it's built with this grandeur that's extraordinary in a human scale that's amazing. And so we live with beauty, and modern culture has taken beauty and denigrated it, and commodified it, and cheapened it. And there is no meaning and purpose in modern culture. So the flip side of this is that we have the chance for ourselves to decide what's beautiful, what's meaningful, and what's purposeful. And 9 times out of 10, when people are honest about that, they find out it's not how they're currently living. So the opportunity is to say, well, then how do I want to live? Now we get down to the bigger question, which is, who do I want to be, given that I managed to show up at this miraculous moment in time when a lot of big stuff's going down? I can either be an unwitting participant, or I can be somebody who's shaping this narrative as it goes along. I'm either unconsciously part of the story, or I'm finding a way to be consciously part of this story. Right? That's the opportunity in this, because the truth is most people are wasting their lives. They're just spinning their wheels. For what?